Hello viewers. Today I'm going to talk about USA, how it rise to economical, political and military preeminence is its remarkable. Initially USA grew from a very small group of 13 British colonies to an independent state to a dominant world power in a fewer than 200 years. The USA has been world's foremost economic power since at least the end of Second World War. The USA is also birthplace of MBA and business schools. It is divided into three equal parts if we talk about US business. First is Gilded Age, second is managerial capitalism, and third is investor capitalism. The early political and economical leaders of USA were fearful that their young nation would be swamped by imports from the older and at that time much more powerful European nations. George Washington, the first president, his Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton was especially keen on infant industry protection policies that would allow especially US industry to grow behind protective barriers to import. Further, horror existed in the form of slave trade and the brutal repression of Native Americans. Both are major part of US development history. For example, McCraw note that 10 million Africans were forcibly transported to the New World with nearly 6 lakhs sent to areas that become part of USA. Until end of 1865, the American Civil War were the 4 million slaves emancipated, and that was only the beginning of much longer struggle for civil rights for black Americans, especially in southern states. The California gold rush of 1850s sent thousands of people westward in search of their fortunes, which came to be known as trust. The most important of all these included Standard Oil, established by John D. Rockefeller, and the various railroad companies owned by Cornelius Vanderbilt. By some calculations, given the context of his name, Rockefeller was the richest man who ever lived. The era of trust is often known as Gilded Age or robber baron phase of US capitalism. As the Industrial Revolution gathered place, the sophistication and the complexity of trust and firms grew. Many start to adopt systems of vertical integration by which the company sought to include as many parts of supply chain as possible under its direct ownership or control. For example, Ford Motor. This company built its own steel marketing and glass making facilities at its massive River Rouge plant. Ford even owned a Brazilian rubber plantation. The growth of early US multinationals was heavily based around their exports of new technologies such as Singer sewing machines and industrial harvester agriculture machines. Between the Wall Street crash and the rise of Japan in 1970s, the US became a dominant force in telecommunications and electronic industries demonstrated. For example, by the power of gain, near monopolistic organizations such as RCA, General Electric, and AT&T and Westinghouse. The rapid growth of USA also threw up all new ideas about how business and management should be organized. The most famous of these ideas was scientifically management, the approach espoused by Frederick W. Taylor, also known as Taylorism. Scientific management is one of the most famous innovation in management thought. Micromanaging approach of Taylorism has been heavily cited that it encouraged and reinforced a blue collar, white collar, them and us mentality. Mass standardization, while far from universally adopted, did influence major US companies. Then the beast is tamed. The new tradition of USA managerial capitalism. The Great Depression until 1980s This was the era of managerial capitalism. Managerial capitalism exists in different versions across most of the world's advanced economies. Then FDR administration were arguably responsible for building powerful and durable structure of regulation in which US capitalism was embedded for contributing a major role in the Allied powers' victory in the Second World War. Managerial capitalism stood for routine, loyalty, and submission. White collar staff devoted their whole career to one firm and tended not to entertain ideas about leaving for greener pasture. The advantages of managerial capitalism did not occur only to the college educated white collar staff. Trade unions were a powerful political force during this era, and unionized blue collar workers also enjoyed job security and considerable benefits. Managerial capitalism delivered the American dream to millions of households. Managerial capitalism, as Chandler 99, it's written in that, was the crucial ingredient of America's organized capitalism. Then, from managerial to investor capitalism in USA. The movement of managerial capitalism to investor capitalism from organized to disorganized capitalism. Then, in changes in the banking system of USA were highly significant throughout the 1990s. Commercial banks such as Citicorps and Banks of America rapidly expand in scale, scope of and centralization by the aggressive taking over smaller banks. The move from managerial capitalism toward investor capitalism therefore represents a concrete power shift away from managers and back towards the owners, much like the robber baron phase. By the end of 1980s, the US finance scene was flooded with new and highly risky finance practices. Unlike the era of managerial capitalism, finance was no longer servant of firms, it became their masters. Although the overall structure of US business has clearly changed from one stability and patternism to one of ceaseless change, there still remain considerable with country diversity in corporate models. Although the US system has gone through different phases, such as the Gilded Age, managerial capitalism, and investor capitalism, it is probably correct to argue that American system today is the most liberal of all richest economies. Importance of culture. Culture affects market demand, first of all. Then managerial behavior is driven by his or her cultural knowledge. Then comes knowledge of native culture. It is useful when dealing with home markets, but it is not effective in foreign markets. Then culture affects the nature of business negotiations. Then culture acts as a hidden entry barrier, but can be overcome with the cultural sensitivity, hard work, and quality. It is the key. I think these are the key points to success. Economy. The economy of United States is highly developed, and it is the world's largest economy, and by nominal GDP, and second largest by PPP. Its purchasing power parity. The US economy is fueled by abundant of natural resources, a well-developed infrastructure, and highly protected. As I have shown in these figures, housing contains 38.4, and this is data from 2012 actually, and transportation takes 20.5. This is household consumer expenditures by major categories. Then comes GDP. GDP per capita is measure of country's economic output that accounts for population. It divides country's gross domestic production by its total population. The GDP figure in 2007 was 4,873,869 million. United States is the world's leading economy with regard to GDP, as can be seen in ranking of quarterly GDP of the 50 countries. Banks. Banks have two important economic functions. First, they operate a payment system, and modern economy cannot function well without an efficient payment system. Most of the money stocks of the country is in fact bank money. The rest of currency is legal tender issued by the government, namely Federal Reserve notes and coins. The second key function of banks is financial intermediation, lending or investing. The money we deposit with them or credit themselves create to business enterprises, households, and government. This is the business side of banking. There were no colonial banks in America. They gave credit to each other or relied on credit from merchants and banks in Great Britain. There were also no modern banks as late as 1781 when young Alexander Hamilton, who would become the most financially astute of founding fathers, he wrote to Robert Morris that most commercial nations have found it necessary to institute banks, and they have proved to be happiest engines that ever were invented for the advancing trade. By Talking about US Constitution, it is divided into three equal parts: legislative, executive, and judicial. Congress is legislative, and it is divided into two parts: House of Representatives and Senate. And then executive, it is divided into president, and then comes vice president. And judicial means the Supreme Court. And there was a special clause which was for business, that is called commerce clause. And according to that, Congress have the right and all the regulations to control the whole business with export imports, and also in states it was having the right to buy, to see all that, buy, sells, and or the foreign country subjects. The state government was retained the right to regulate trade within its border only. Coming to nature of business, uh, America is number one in petroleum oils. It exports the world's largest petroleum, and in machinery including computers it exports 13.1%.